G'day, I'm Dan Finlay, publisher of Australian Muscle Car Magazine, and today I'm introducing the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast. 20 years ago, our founder Ray Berghouse launched Australian Muscle Car Magazine, the very first magazine created specifically for Aussie muscle car enthusiasts. Now, we draw on that history. Over 120 editions, well over 1,000 exhaustively researched features to create this, a brand new way to enjoy stories about muscle cars and the people who love them. As you listen, keep in mind that these are the stories of those who actually played the game, and it'll be their best recollection of what might have happened on that sunny Sunday afternoon at Warwick Farm in 1965. Rest assured though, these are great stories from a golden era of Australian motorsport.
Greetings and salutations, Mr. Allan Grice, by definition Australia's fastest ex-pastry cook and ex-politician.
Well, there you go. The Daily Double.
Where do we find you today? I know you're living in Queensland. Is it you up there in the Sunshine State?
Up in the Sunshine State, yes. Paradise Point, on the northern end of the Gold Coast. The only place to be.
Yes. I think there's an awful lot of people in Melbourne who'd like to be where you are right now.
Well, we've only got 3 bedrooms here, so they better get in quick.
Sounds fair. Let's go right back to the very beginning. Your motor racing career would have started in the 1960s.
Before the war. That's as old as you can get.
Well, before which war, I guess you got to ask.
Of course.
So when did you start?
62, 63, something of that order, in an MGTC that was already built for racing with a cage, etc., and bigger brakes. So that's where it started. And I won the first race that I ever went in, a little club race at Warwick Farm, and I wrote it off in the second.
Yes, well, that's the top and tail of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And then I didn't race then for something like 15 or 18 months while I saved up for another car.
Yes, it's funny. In those days, the early 60s, I can remember TCs were still very, very popular with a lot of people.
Yes.
They really wanted to own a TC until they bought one, and then they didn't want to own it anymore.
Yeah, there's a few cars like that, isn't there?
Absolutely. So you probably got into regular competition mid-60s?
Yes. The next car was an Elfin Clubman, which was a later Super 7 copy. And I did quite a few races in that, and then I went into the first open wheeler, which was a Elfin Mono 600.
And that was, were you living up in Cessnock at the time?
Yes. Yes, I was. And when you start motor racing, you've sort of, particularly when you come from the country, you've got to try and get into the scene somewhere. And it was a tradition that motor racing type people, journalists, mechanics, and drivers, etc., used to go to a hotel near the central railway station called the Horsepower Hotel. And it was of a Wednesday night, as I recall.
That's correct.
And I used to, just so that I could talk to people in motorsport and, get introductions and get more general knowledge and learn about sponsorship and things like that, I used to make the trek down each week. And, of course, the job that I had, you start work at about, depending on the weather. People eat a lot more when it's cold and rainy than they do when it's hot and sunny. So you start anywhere from 4 a.m. till 6 a.m. In that job to get the work done. And I'd only be getting home from Sydney at probably midnight or 2 o'clock. So that made it interesting.
So you were basically a reciprocal Sydneyite, backwards and forwards for 3 or 4 hours at the pub on Wednesday evenings.
Yeah, well, it's you did what you did. You had to do, and I people say, who was your first sponsor? It was me. It was fortunate that I learnt the family trade. as a pastry cook because, that's the way in those days you didn't have a lot of say in the matter. You just went into the family business. And it was fortunate in hindsight because it enabled me to work and do my job when other people were sleeping. And then I drove a truck during the day for Oak Dairy Company. And at weekends I wasn't racing, I drove a cab. So I had two and a half jobs. And when you'd work those sorts of hours, you don't have time to use the phrase piss it up against the wall. So it all goes into motorsport. So when you ask who was my first sponsor, it was Allan Grice.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some people seem to think even today that if you are successful in motorsport, it's largely down to luck. But they don't look behind the scenes at the countless hours of hard yakka that goes into being lucky because you worked very hard to just grind your way forward.
Yes, and I did. And I recognised right at the start that I was not a mechanic and I wasn't about to become one suddenly overnight. So I had mates who I just paid their expenses to race meetings and accommodation and stuff. And they worked on the car for nothing in after hours and at weekends, etc. So I never rated myself. I never had interest in mechanics and was never any good at it for that reason. So I made it my job to earn the money and help some mates help me. So it's a funny way you get started, but it's the only way that was available to me. So that was the best way.
Everybody has a slightly different path to get to the goal, don't they?
Yes, exactly.
So you were driving sports cars and then open wheelers in the mid to late 60s. Now,
yes.
Was the 1969 Bathurst 1000 the first of your touring car races? Because
yes.
you were in that event with Bill Tuckey, the legendary Australian motoring journalist, and
yes.
I guess. Did you approach Bill? Bill approach you?
No, the way it happened was that David Mackay, who ran his own company, Scuderia Veloce, to run Ferraris and things like that, he was a entrepreneur, journalist, a guy with a stutter. You wouldn't think so, but he had approached, or Fiat had approached him, and they wanted somebody in their marketing department wanted to become involved in motor racing in some form or another. The only way it was available to them was to run a thing called a 1500s.
The 124 Sport.
124 Sport, exactly so. Why it was called Sport was merely because it had the word written sport on it. It was about as sporty as anyway. And that was the reason. And so David got the money and a couple of cars to run at Bathurst alongside the Hold Monaros that he was running, which featured they were outright cars. And he had seen, because he was so involved with open wheelers, he had seen me racing in the 1100cc Elfin Monocoque, and thought I had half a chance. So he approached me and said, "Would you like to do this at Bathurst the weekend?" And I said, "Would I? Bloody hell, yeah!"
Yes.
And that was that.
That's so.
But as I recall, I paid my own accommodation the way up there and back. I just had the free drive.
So you weren't exactly what you would call a traditional paid driver.
Exactly so.
But then again, David Mackay didn't pay a whole lot of drivers at pretty much any time. Fairly well famous for that. So
yes.
you and Bill up against an absolute flock of Falcon GTs and Monaro GTSs. That must have been the slowest car in the field or in the class, surely.
No, I think there were there were a couple of cars there that we actually passed. In fact. Oh, and Bill, the reason that Bill was there was that obviously being a journalist, he would report his own feats, and that would enhance the entry.
Yes, I think Bill was working at KG Murray at the time, the boss of Wheels magazine.
Yes.
So,
okay.
so how did that translate in terms of your sudden desire to go into touring cars as against staying in open wheelers?
Well, I always knew that if you want to go to Europe, which I didn't want to do, open wheelers was the scene. But if you wanted to stay in Australia, which I did, you had to be touring cars or nothing, because the people that ran open wheelers and were successful were just people that were interested and had the money, or had a patron to pay all the bills, and that was not me.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, because when you look at the 1968-69 time frame,
yes,
that was the period during which the FIA changed the rules about sponsorship on racing cars.
Correct.
In 68, sponsorship pretty much didn't exist. In 69, it certainly did.
And the silly fact is that there is a lot more tin to paint a sign on, or stick a sign on a touring car than there is in an open wheeler.
Absolutely. So that conversion, that time frame of 68, 69,
yes,
it changed the landscape of motorsport in the world almost overnight.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the things that I've always been puzzled about, I guess, is that you're, as a touring car driver for decades, 3 decades of competition at the very front end of the game,
yes.
You're one of the first, you and people like you and Freddie Gibson and Johnny Goss were the first really, let's say, non-moneyed drivers who came into the game at that time frame with sponsorship money and were able to be successful.
Yes, after banging your head against the door for a long time, yes, that's true.
Yeah, because, I mean, up until that point, if you didn't own a car dealership or something of that nature, you didn't have the necessary money to buy the best car. But if you could find a sponsor, then their money would buy the car for you.
Yes, exactly. Plus work 2.5 jobs helps.
It doesn't do any harm. It certainly doesn't hold you back. So, look, we've had a bit of a look at your career in terms of, the things you've done, the places you've been. I don't want to go through a chronological list of the things that you've done, because it would take the entire hour we've got to talk. But, you've won 2 Bathurst races. Now, that puts you into a small group of people who've done more than the average, 86 and 1990.
Yes.
Do you have a favourite? Which was the most satisfying?
Well, they were both satisfying because, some other people do say that 86, the Chickadee car, was the last of the genuine privateers. And we were certainly up against, I think, 3 factories at least in that year, and beat them all. On the other hand, 90 was very satisfying because it was so unheralded. The turbo cars were seriously fast and seriously light, and were odds on, without question, to win the race. But all along, we did think that we did have a chance, because we knew that they would sprint and go hard and go very bloody quickly and open a gap, and then they'd wind the boost back. And adjustable boost wasn't allowed, but they used to adjust the windscreen washer, I think, and that would coincidentally wind the boost back. And then because the thing about turbos and Bathurst is you're sitting there with a high diff, and you're sitting there in second for a long time, and then third for a long time, and then fourth for a long time, and then you just get into fifth, going up mountain straight. And on a hot Bathurst Sunday, that's a lot of heat generated with the throttle wide open through those gears with the tall diff. And we figured if we could make them keep their boost up, we'd break them. And that's exactly what happened. They would run away, and we'd bring them back and pass them and start racing with them. They'd turn their wick up, and off they'd go again. And one by one, we had that lovely white smoke appear when the turbos expired, and they one by one they parked, and we won by a lot. So that was pleasant.
The classic example of the tortoise and the hare.
Absolutely so, yeah. And we flogged that thing all day. It was a bulletproof engine. It was a great leap forward in revs. I think 6,250 was the magic rev in those days for 308 V8. And with Benson, got parts, lightweight, strong cotton rods and pistons from all over the world, and built an engine that would run to 8 all day, and that was incredible. So $8,000 in a 308 V8 in that era, in those years. Yeah, 1990.
It's a long time ago, and people sort of fail to remember, I suppose, the generational changes in what we just loosely call the Holden V8.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's not even the 90s, because the race was in 90, but the development on that and those revs were available in the 80s, the late 80s, that Benson was working on for quite a long time to get the things to live that long, to live at that high rev rate, I mean.
That year, particularly 1990, of course, you were teamed with a guy who had become a firm favourite in Australia over many years of coming out once a year, Mr. Win Percy.
Yes.
What was it like to drive with a guy who had even more experience in touring cars than you had?
Well, I got him out in the first place in an SAI car, I think it was. And he, in practice, he lost it going through McPhillamy and stuck it in the wall before Skyline. And I got out of the car, and he thought that the POM was going to be attacked by the spectators, because they were hanging over the fence shouting and obscenities at him because he'd written off Gricey's bloody car. So he was actually crouched down behind the arm car until the officials came, because it was looking a bit dark there for a while. But we got it running again. It was pretty horrible. The guys worked all night. It wasn't wheel aligned very well. It was the worst place, actually, was down the straight. As the car rose and fell on the suspension with the humps, the front end would take on all sorts of weird characteristics and want to steer all over the bloody road. It wasn't pleasant to drive, but you get that sometimes.
Now, what year was that?
FII car, which would be, I don't know, 90 was that year, so it'd be late 80s.
Later, yeah, 88 or 89. Yes, because the last James Hardy race was earlier. It was in 87 from memory. Anyway, Win Percy, a good guy?
Oh, yeah, top bloke. I kept going to other places because it bid me well when I went to Asia, when I couldn't get sponsorship here, serious sponsorship. And it was beyond to go keep taking steps up in the in categories of touring cars. You needed more than you could get from working 2.5 jobs. I tried with proposals everywhere I could to get sponsorship for the next step in touring car racing in Australia, without success. So I thought we got to get outside the box with our thinking here, which I've done a couple of times in my career, and it's paid off each time. I saw that that there was a Singapore Grand Prix was coming up for the first time on the Thomson Road circuit, a street circuit in Singapore, and to be followed by a Malaysian Grand Prix in Batu Tiga circuit near Kuala Lumpur. So I got on a plane, found out the good old chaps that were organising it, expatriate POMs, organised a meeting and went over there with scrapbooks and, photographs and all that sort of stuff of what I'd done in 1100cc Formula 2 monocoque, Elfin. And they said, yes, we're keen to get, foreign names rather than just the people that live in Hong Kong and Malaya. And they gave me the name of a Chinese businessman who was Wong Peng Hong, who was a rich man from a rich family. And he was he'd opened a car tuning service, and he was after the expat Australians and English and French and Canadians and Americans that lived in Hong Kong and Singapore in those times. He was to do their servicing, and he wanted to advertise Newton Enterprises, and he said, "What will it take to win the first Grand Prix?" And I said, "Well, little INF car is a Formula One car, international Formula One car is ridiculous, and that you'd only get rubbish. The best way would be to get an Australian national Formula One car, which was a Brabham with a Coventry Climax engine in it." And he said, "All right, how much?" I said, "Oh, I know about this amount." And he said, "Well, go and see what's there and get it and ring me and tell me and I'll organise it." So I did all that, and all the time going, "Yeah, righto, yeah, sure." We get down to the crunch, and this won't happen, because I'd seen that happen so many times in Australia. But I came out and went around the traps and saw the cars that were available, and the best one that was available right then and right there was the Repco. It was not a Repco Brabham. It was a Brabham ANF one car, Australian National Formula One car, with a 2.5 litre short straight Coventry Climax engine. So that was the best mechanical car. And I got on the phone and told PH how much they wanted and how much it would be to air freight it. And he said, "Okay, give me your bank details, and I'll put the money in it tonight." And that it did. So the next day I paid Alec Milton, and the car left about a couple of weeks later or something. And I put it on pole for the Grand Prix by a fair bit. And the gearbox broke when I was a lap in front. So there you go.
Only a lap in front.
Yeah, it was a lap in front.
Oh, gosh. So that would have been your first and possibly only Grand Prix victory in a long and illustrious career.
Yeah, exactly. They did repair the car and went up, and I did win in Batatiga, Malaya.
Well, not all was lost.
Not all was lost. But, I mean, that was thinking outside the box. I couldn't afford it anymore here, and I couldn't work any more than 2.5 jobs. And I needed more money for the next step up. And I wasn't about to get it in this country, so I went to another one.
So looking a little later on, you 2 Bathurst wins, 2 Australian sports sedan championships in the Corvair in 78 and 79. That must have been a fascinating car to drive.
Oh, it was, yeah. Oh, and don't forget the first 12-hour race I won too, with Fitz in a.
In the Supra.
Yeah, Supra. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, it's amazing because your career goes right across all sorts of things. I mean, the fact that what on earth decided you to go to America to drive in NASCAR?
Of course, it couldn't be done.
Well, that's a good answer.
Yeah, it couldn't be done. I got enormous press over there because I was the first I was the first from the non-American continent, because you've got to take the Canadians. It was the odd Canadian that was having a run there too, to qualify. And the race I qualified for was the World 600, which is bigger than in their terms, not in ours, of the Daytona 500. You ask Australian, the Daytona 500 is the biggest NASCAR event in the United States, but it's not really. It's the second biggest. The World 600 at Charlotte is the biggest one, and to qualify there, I think I was something like a second and a couple of tenths off pole, and I was 32 out of 38 on the grid. Yes. Goes to show how competitive it is. But to get a proper picture of it, because it's the big race, that Daytona 500 and the World 600, on the Tuesday, which is when they open the gates and it all starts, I don't know how many. There'd probably be 60 full-on semi-articulated transporters with race cars and spare cars and spare chassis and spare engines arrive for the first day's practice, which I think is the Tuesday, and then it's timed from there on. On Wednesday morning, the slowest 5 they put your car in the truck, son. You're going home. There's 5 Tuesday morning and 5 Tuesday afternoon, another 10 Wednesday morning, and there is tens and tens. I'm not going to be silly and say hundreds, but there are lots and lots of full professional race teams that don't even make qualifying. They're sent home because they're too slow. It's like, I don't know, it's like 200 cars go up to Bathurst to try and qualify for the race where the 60 start. It's those are sorts of numbers. So each time you're there, the mechanics, the American mechanics that were with me and came and helped, and I paid them, but not much. Every night they'd bloody celebrate. They'd get the beer out and and I say, hey, hang on, fellas, we got it again tomorrow. Oh yeah, okay, tomorrow. As if to say, there's no way you're going to get through it again. And we got through to the race. As I said, 1 second and a couple of tenths was 32nd on the grid. So it's pretty competitive.
And so you only did the one race, the Charlotte race?
Yes, I did.
One of those sort of tick-the-box exercises?
Yeah. I did. I went back a second time, and one of the teams, Raymock, helped get me back there, and I drove one of their cars. They got me back there because they thought having qualified in this funny Australian-built car, that I'd do better than that in their car, in one of their cars, American-built car. And that's the case, but that was a major error on their part and also on my part, which I kicked my bum for years over. What happened was that to get in, and the seat is so confined and close to the roll cage and the steering, et cetera, and the doors don't open, they shut, you get in through the window, that to get into the seat, you've got to take the steering wheel off. So it's on a quick release 2-button arrangement, and you press the buttons in and push the steering wheel onto the spline, let the buttons out, and that's your steering wheel. And Americans that start with this when they first get into some dirt track car, they've got removable steering wheels, so they're all attuned to putting the steering wheel on before they go out in the track, and then taking it off when they get back off the track. And the team knew, because we'd had a bit of a run, and I had to go to a rookie driving school. But we'd had some runs at another circuit, a little circuit, and they knew that I wasn't used to this take the wheel off, so they kicked themselves for not double checking, and I kicked myself for not double checking, but the end result was the same. I stuck it in the wall at full tilt. I went out and did some laps, and they got on the phone and said, wow, that's you've just gone 2 tenths quicker than their normal driver. And I said, all right, well, I'll put a lap. And I was serious. I was looking at the track and looking at myself with a wide open perspective, trying to take it all in and not to get too uptight and, wring the neck who had the white fingers around the steering wheel. And I hasn't really had a crack. I just warmed up with a few laps to do the time that would have qualified me, and comfortably, and I hadn't gone flat yet. So I said, okay, I'll have a crack now. To the response to them saying that I'd done a good time. And as you sort of move your butt around in the seat and shake your shoulders around and push and pull sort of on the steering wheel, that's exactly what I did, and it came off my hands. And I said some words that are very interesting.
Yes, fortunately not on live television.
And the only thing I could think to do, because you've got to remember that these cars are built set up only to turn left. They've completely changed when they go to a LR circuit, a left-right circuit, because they have, let me think, they have strong negative camber on the front right and positive caster, and the reverse on the front left. So if you take your hands off the steering wheel, the car will gradually, more than gradually, turn left, because that's what it's got to do. It's got to turn left on the bank. So as soon as you take your hands off the wheel, or you take the
wheel off the car,
the wheel off the column, it turns left. And I'm already up to speed because this is going to be a quick lap. And so it came down off the bowl and just... then you have the conundrum. Do I jump on the brakes and try and spin the car? But you're already heading for the bloody arm car on the inside. So I just sat there and tried to get the steering wheel back on the spline. And, of course, the car is turning left, so the spline is turning left. And it didn't happen. And where I hit the fence happened to be where it wasn't completely smooth. There was a gate there, and the gate was not 100% smooth with the track, so I hit the butt end of a gate, and that's they had a look at the car. As soon as it brought in, they said, no, that car's going to the dumpster. That was that. And I couldn't, I didn't break anything, but I got so much force on my chest through the seatbelts that I couldn't hold food down for 2 or 3 days afterwards. I just couldn't hold anything down in my stomach. So I had a bit of a thump there, but that's all right. That's part of it. Comes with the job.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you're enjoying this episode of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast. To get access to every back issue and a stack of exclusive benefits, visit the website at musclecarmag.com.au and look for the premium tag. A whole new way to enjoy muscle cars. Now, back to the show.
So when Bob Jane decided to bring NASCAR to Australia
yes.
and built the only NASCAR-style circuit in Melbourne at Calder in
yes.
the late 80s, you were one of the first guys to put your hand up to drive NASCARs down there in that era.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I can remember sponsorship from Foster's Beer.
There was, yeah. Initially it was with Bob, but with Foster's, yes.
And the very first major race down there was an enormous accident, wasn't there, that you were involved in
yes.
very early in the first few laps. Took out quite a few cars.
No, it wasn't that. It was reasonably, probably a quarter into the race or something like that, or a bit more. What happened was that I'd run out of brakes. There'd been something wrong, and the brakes overheated, and I lost brakes. I had to pump up, and I could only just pump up a little bit of pedal. So, relaying all this to the crew, and if you come in with a green, where the other cars are still running at race pace, you come in for any reason, she's all over. You'd be 3 or 4 laps behind before the time you did anything, and then got back out again. So I was hanging in, driving the car with no brakes as well as I could, and losing a spot every now and then. while I just kept it going. And, of course, I was waiting for a yellow to come in for them to try and fix the brakes, find out what was going on. And when the yellow came out, I was in it.
Yes.
I came round up the back straight, and the two cars had come together and hit another one on the turn into the end of the back straight. So that's sort of turn 3, they call that in NASCAR. And I just had no brakes. So I just threw it sideways and got the nose around and went into it. And that was the end of that activity.
Yes, we still have the photographs of that accident in the files for Muscle Car Magazine.
Okay.
And, if you want one of those for your study wall, I'm happy to supply you one, no problem. You're dead centre in the picture, I can promise you.
Well, that's with no brakes, with my foot on the floor.
Exactly, yes. Just arriving at the scene of the accident at a very high speed.
Very high speed, yeah. That's why I hit so bloody hard. I couldn't decelerate it at all.
Yeah. So let's go back to Bathurst for a minute.
Yep.
The stats tell me that you've had 27 starts at Bathurst, which is not a bad average. 12 DNFs, so about a little under half. But you, interestingly enough, out of 27 starts, you had 19 different co-drivers.
Well, there you go.
That's got to be a record, surely.
Yeah. I don't really know the reason for that. I think it was people that came with a bit of sponsorship.
Yes, money speaks almost all languages, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does, particularly in that game.
So we talked about Win Percy earlier. We sort of didn't really talk about Graham Bailey, who you were teamed with in '86 when you won the race for the first time. All of those co-drivers, and you drove in mostly Holdens from memory?
Yes, yeah.
Back from the Tirana days, XU1s, and then into SLR 5000s and L34s and A9Xs. I mean, I can remember that you were the first, your team was the first to run a Commodore in 1980, am I right?
Yeah, and the first to run a, what was it, S500, SV 500 or something?
Yeah, SLR 5000,
yes,
5000.
Yes.
That was in the Tirana days, yeah.
Yeah, we've had the first one before the factory. They were still playing with it.
And of course,
and those days, that was series production. They reckon that series production was a much fairer and better way to go racing, but that was bollocks. I can remember, series production. You had to run the standard camshaft and the standard brake size and the standard wheel size and all that sort of stuff. I can remember at Warwick Farm, Harry Firth walked up to me with a with a camshaft wrapped up in brown paper and said, "Here, Cock, this is the latest camshaft. Put her in. She'll go a bit better." He'd developed the grind on the cam, and he'd been testing it and changing his exhaust lengths, etc., to suit the cam for the last bloody 3 or 4 months. And he gives it to you on Saturday morning, said, "Here, Cock, put this in. She'll go better." Yeah, it was very fair series production. The factories didn't take any advantages of that at all.
Oh, of course not. Of course not. No, that was the era of things like air conditioning units that were taken out of the front of the car and bolted to the floor in the passenger side.
Yeah, and a great lump of tin cut out of the roof because that's where the sunroof used to be.
That was lowering the centre of gravity by reducing the weight of the roof, correct?
Well, yeah, you'd have to pop rivets of aluminium over the big hole in the bloody ceiling, wouldn't you?
Yes, exactly.
I was the first one to do that.
So that wasn't so much bending the rules as just using them to your best advantage.
Yeah, well, there could have been a sunroof in that car.
Yeah, possible, certainly, exactly. So let's spring forward a few years. Let's talk about the Commodore era. Now, you were you were one of the three teams sponsored by cigarette companies. Yours was Craven Mild, running against Peter Brock in the Marlboro car and Alan Moffat in the Peter Stuyvesant car. That must have been a very interesting era because you had real money for the first time.
Yes, but not in terms of what Brock had, of course, as I find out later from mechanics and stuff. But I'm not making any excuses there. We had good sponsorship for the era, for sure, and good support.
Yeah.
And we had them acknowledging the fact that, which was pretty good from a sponsor, WD and HO Wheels, acknowledging the fact that Brock had the factory support in addition to the Marlboro money. And it was you're always going to be behind the eight ball. I mean, I beat him plenty of times. On odd times, we'd have the advantage because we'd have a better tyre. Because in those days, it wasn't a fixed tyre. I think it's a backward step, the fixed tyre, because that you have today and you've had for a long time. Because when you've got Bridgestone, Yokohama, Dunlop, Pirelli, and Avon at different times, all having a crack and getting involved in motor racing, you've got a situation where I'd be very much favourite to win this meet this weekend at Oran Park because it suited my Yokohamas, but you would be favourite to win it at Sandown next week because you're on Dunlops, and it was a Dunlop track, and that added some spice, and it added to the change results. One person didn't win everything all the time. And that added to motor racing. I think it's one of the reasons why there are people that say, the good old days, because different cars would be favourite to win on different tracks.
I would agree with that to a great degree. In that same Commodore era, you and Brock and his team, you went to Europe in the same year. You competed against the Europeans very, very successfully. And probably the high point of your year that year would have been the Spa 24-hour race?
Probably. We certainly it was the old money game again. Brock had Alan Moffat with him as a co-driver. What a co-driver to have, the two drivers. And I had various Belgians and Germans and Austrians and Englishmen who came along and paid to have the second seat. And so I'd put the car on the grid. I'd qualify the car, test the car for the circuit, and set it up and qualify it, and put it certainly on the sharp end in front of Brock every time, and certainly on the sharp end of the circuit in the top 10 and at times in the top 3. And I've led races because we didn't actually use qualifiers, so some of their qualifying times would be a little bit false. And we had a very good race tyre that used to qualify pretty well with Yokohama. And invariably because I was running with the tyre that I qualified, I'd be quicker on race day. And I led a lot of those races and got a lot of press from it, which helped because then we started to get a couple of sponsors, supporting sponsors over there, for actually European sponsors. So it helped. But they were tough days, but it was always going to be tough. I never thought it was going to be any other way. I knew I was on a hide into nothing, but that's all. That's all part of growing up, isn't it?
Indeed it is. In that era, I think it's fair to say that you had a lot of critics, or some critics in Australia, because of your driving style as being, you were known as a fairly aggressive driver, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you went to Europe, for those races, they were driving just as aggressively,
absolutely,
absolutely cannoning over the curbs.
Yeah.
So I guess you probably fitted in a little easier than some of the other Australians. Did you after that exercise was over, did you feel vindicated that you were right all along about the driving style?
Yes, I did. I did, and I certainly learned a lot more over there. But then I got a precursor in the support races, the Adelaide Grand Prix, that had some overseas cars and a lot of chicanes and with rough, pretty big concrete curbs. And after the first practice, I came back in and said, it's I know I can see where they're getting the pace. We were off the pace. I was in the top half dozen, but off the front row. And Les said, "Well, what do we do?" And I said, "Oh, well, they're crashing over the chicane past the pits. They just straight line it, crash, 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 and really bounce the cars." And he said, "Well, we've got to do it." And I said, "Yeah, well, I don't know. I think the way they're hitting it, it'll damage the turret." He said, "Well, you damage the turret and I'll fix the bloody turret and it'll be all right tomorrow." That was Les's attitude, which was a great attitude. Don't bend my car. If you need to go fast, bend the bloody car. I'll fix it up and make it stronger for tomorrow. What a great attitude.
Yes.
And that's what we did. I put the thing on the front row by going crash, 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 and the crowd used to get down there to watch me go through the S's. It really, they were very aggressive curbs, and I just straight lined it, crash, 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 and sure, it bent the towers, but overnight he fashioned some support at the top of the towers and fixed it up so it lasted the race. But that was interesting, and that's the way they drove over there. And that's one of the reasons they had a falling out with Frank Gardner, which was fairly obvious to the community, but they really didn't know why. But his attitude was, you go out and you run, fifth or sixth, and you keep your nose out of joint. You don't crash across curves because you might bend something. And at the end of the day, if two of the front leading six pull out because they've smashed the car across the curb, and another two pull out because they've over-revved, another one pulls out because his mum rang and said he had to come home early for tea, that you'd inherit the lead and win a very fine, smart, intelligent motor race. And I always thought that was a lot of bullshit. And I just think it is today. Motor racing is about motor racing, and reliability trials are reliability trials, and never the two should meet. And that was the underlying reason that we fell out. He was, and then he started to undermine me with WD and HO Wills and say that I keep breaking the car. That's why there's not better results and all of that sort of stuff. And the Wills people were appreciative of the fact that I was first and I introduced Frank. I was their driver. So when Frank approached them for sponsorship with John Player for the Corvair, they got me to go down to Melbourne and look at the car in the workshop because they didn't know what they were looking at. I knew what I was looking at. I didn't know how to build it. I knew what I was looking at. I'd been around motorsport for long enough. And it was me that said, yeah, the car's what he says it is, and I think it'll be a good thing. The concept is great. And that's the way he got in there in the first place. And then from that day, he attempted to take the whole thing over. And that's where he got himself as team manager when he pulled out. It's a long story. It goes on forever. But as I've said many times before, it was my old mum who died at the age of 92, said, "Son, if you can't speak well of somebody, don't speak at all." So I have nothing further to say about Frank Gardner.
Okay. Well, we'll touch on one other thing before we come back to Australia. You had a number of drives at Le Mans in Porsches and in Nissans. How dramatically different is that style of racing from 10 and 20 lap sprint races around Amaroo Park?
Well, you're a little bit nice in the braking areas, and you don't go crashing across curbs for 24 hours a day. No, it's just you come back a few revs, you come back in your braking distances. You do take the edge off it all, but there are people that take too much off and they finish up driving like old Mrs. McGurk and Durkin in a 1200 Volkswagen. Others that know how to hold the car together but still do a time. Because I think, go on.
They're such different. Prototype cars are so different from almost anything else in the world.
Yes.
So much grunt, so much speed for so long.
Yes.
I mean, if you go back into the early days of the Le Mans race, two drivers hammering around, getting in and out of the car every hour or so.
Yes.
It's a lot different today. At least 3 drivers most of the time. Did you have 3 in your cars?
3, yes, but the third bloke was just a visitor.
So two professionals and 1 amateur.
Yes.
And did you enjoy it? That's the question. Was it good fun?
Yes, I did. In fact, Howard Marsden, when I drove the Nissan was what should I say? It was a factory attempt by a Japanese manufacturer to win the most prestigious European race, Le Mans 24 Hour. And Howard Marsden was the motorsport manager for Nissan, for Nismo, which is the arm of Nissan motorsport arm. And they had a March chassis that they'd modified and Nissan-fied and put an engine and gearbox and et cetera on it. So, but that was the basis of it. And I think, talking of kudos or comment, Howard Marsden made one of the most complimentary comments about my driving ever, when at the end of or the latter part of the race, when we were cruising around to finish, he said, "Now, Allan, how did you think you went in the car?" And I said, "Oh, I think I went all right. I was sort of on the pace of the Porsches." And he said, "Well, I've watched you on and off for many years, and I think this is your finest hour," in typical Howard Marsden session. "This is your finest hour." He said, "During the night, when it was raining, you and Hans Stuck were swapping fastest laps, and he was in a Porsche, the factory Porsche, and you were in a Nissan. I thought that was splendid."
As only Howard could say in such cultured tones.
Absolutely. Cultured, dulcet tones.
All right. Well,
that was a memory. I remember it word for word today, so it made an impact.
I can imagine that would stick in anybody's mind. Okay, a question right across the board of all your motor racing. Which is the almost moment that really still frightens you when you think back on it? Was there one?
Not really. It's what you do. You play football professionally, you hurt your knee and you get a cut in the eye, and you box and you get a flat nose. It's if you're going to worry about stuff like that, you're in the wrong game.
Sounds like a smart attitude.
It's an honest attitude.
Yeah.
If it was going to frighten the shit out of me, I would have gone and done something else. But I had some good hits. But if you're going to have a crash, do it in a race car. They're built for it.
That makes a lot of sense. Remember
when a racetrack, because the fences are built for it as well.
Remember the strainer post on the inside of Murray's Corner at Bathurst when you decided to attack it with a Tirana?
Yeah, I do. I remember the little bloody dolomite shit box that put me in there as well.
Okay, questions about other people. You drove against an awful lot of drivers, both Australian and European and American.
Yeah.
Who did you respect the most? Was it Brock or Moffat or Johnson or Bond or somebody else?
JB. JB is one of the best all-round drivers that I classified myself as. He'd get in anything and make it competitive. And there's some drivers that they had to have more horsepower than anyone else, or they had to have more grippy tyres than anyone else, or something of that nature. But JB would jump in anything and put it on the pace.
JB as in John Bowe?
John Bowe, sorry, yeah. And I used to think that I could do that because I was always happy to drive in these one design categories, the Alpha Suds and stuff like that. Whereas a lot of the so-called my contemporaries at the time wouldn't go near with a barge pole because some kid might kick their ass just through natural ability.
There's nothing worse than natural ability, is there?
Well, if you look back through the times and bear that in mind, you'll see who was in Alpha Suds and who wasn't.
Exactly.
Okay. And I
Okay.
think of the name drivers, there was Colin Bond and myself were about the only two, I think.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
You probably haven't owned as many racing cars as you've driven.
No, exactly.
So you're more fortunate than a lot.
Yeah.
Is there a racing car that you did own that you wished you still had?
No, not really. They're cricket bats. They're tools of trade. They're not things to fall in love with and hold hands. They're if you have that attitude, I think you've got the wrong attitude. You're too nice on the car because you don't want to hurt your friend.
Understood. What about road cars?
Oh, automatic V8 and someone else owns.
Yes. What they say about hire cars. The fastest cars in the world can leap tall buildings in a single bound. I really mean that. They're cricket bats. So,
if somebody comes out with a better cricket bat that hits the ball further, that's your favourite.
That's the one you use. Yeah. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It doesn't matter whether it's European, American, Japanese, Australian. Doesn't matter.
No, nothing to do with it.
That's very common sense.
Mm-hmm.
What was the best piece of advice that anybody ever gave you, particularly about your motor racing career?
Oh, I'll have to stop and think about that one. It wouldn't be a gardener, is it? That's hard. I'll tell you an interesting one. 82, I put the Commodore on pole, and Alan Brown was the owner of the car and the co-driver.
Oh, the recar man.
Yeah, we came second. And in qualifying, I was the first one ever to do average 100 mile an hour for the lap. And all the factories were there. They were all having a crack. And Brock was second, and he was sort of a couple of tenths off me, that's all. And we came to the Hardy's Heroes, and I said to Les, I think it was, he said, "Well, do you want to put some more tyres on?" I said, "Oh, geez, I don't know. I think we can probably get the quickest lap with the tyres we got, which were a almost new set of the softer race tyre, not a qualifier." And Brownie was there, and he said, he was listening to the conversation. He said, "What'd you say?" I said, "I think we might be quick enough with the tyres we got on. They've only done 3 laps." He said, "What? Oh, bloody hell. Recar," as though it was somebody else. "Recar's put up $5,000 or $10,000 it was for the first for pole position. Don't be bloody stupid. Put another set of tyres on it. Jesus Christ.
I want to get my money back.
Yeah, so we put another set of tyres on and did it. The second car to average 100 mile an hour lap, put it on pole.
That was a very funny year for one reason in my memory. Do you remember what Allan said when he was asked by I think it was Evan Green on the podium why he had chosen to be the co-driver with you?
Yeah.
You remember what he said?
No.
He said, "I own the car." And that was a good enough reason.
You don't have to have any other reason.
Okay.
But, I mean, when you think of it, it's rarely done. You've got Brock, who's supposed to be the fastest and best ever, with as much money, as much backing as anybody, if not more, in the factory car. And on the same day, at the same time, with the same breed of tyres, you put it on pole, all out of Les Small's workshop, not out of General Motors Holden. It's a pretty bloody good effort.
I would say that's the understatement of the afternoon.
Yeah. You know, it's unnoticed, unappreciated by the great public. In fact, it's unappreciated by probably all but 100 people in the country who really understand what it's about.
Agreed. Our final question, which is always fun.
Yep.
What is your favourite motor racing smell and why?
Smell?
Smell.
Well, it's not, oops, I've gone too far under brakes.
Yes, understood.
I don't know. There's certainly a smell that a race car has when it's been extended that everything is hot. And I don't mean boiling coolant, but I mean everything is hot because the thing is that people don't appreciate is they see the outside of the car, they don't see the inside of the car, and they don't know that in the interest of lightness, all the sound deadening is removed, all the carpet and the underfelt and the floor is removed, and the inside of the floor, or the inside of the car, is just tin, straight tin, with a bit of anti-rust so it doesn't pick up any stains or marks. And the exhaust system on a V8 is obviously 4 pipes coming out of each side of the engine, going into 2 and then going into another 2. And the car is snuggled down on the ground so it gets through the air. And you've got to make space for the exhaust pipes coming from the head to the tail of the car, and you've got to keep them as close to the tin as the floor as you can as they pass underneath. And the floor has got no soundproofing, no deadening, therefore no fireproofing, no heat resistance. So you're just sitting on, you burn your feet, you burn your boots. Your boots are, your driving boots are mostly rubber soled, which melts. So I've had a lot of, over the years, had a lot of sort of minor blisters and minor burning to the feet. And you're sitting in that environment trying to act like a watchmaker, a watchmaker sportsman. It's a hostile environment to go to work in.
That's an understatement also. Allan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I've really enjoyed it, and I take my hat off to you, a man of prodigious talent behind the wheel of a car, and I think probably a man who should have won a lot more races and championships than you actually did, but you put up a hell of a fight.
Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure.
That brings us to the end of the episode. Huge thanks to our guest and our host, and we hope you've enjoyed hearing from one of the people that make the Australian muscle car community what it is. See you next time on the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast, and until then, happy driving.